Hello everyone, I'm Tracy and I'm here with Shane. In today's video, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the two plane crashes that happened over the past few days, the one in Philly and the one all over the Potomac River in DC. And we're going to just go into the explanations for these two plane crashes and discuss whether we think they were accidents or they were planned. And it was the Blackhawk accident doing an exercise in support of the continuity of government plan. And it's been actually, Pete Hegseth has actually stated that it was an exercise in support of the continuity of government. So we'll go a little bit into why that might be. So I'll let Shane get started, and I'll go into, he broke down the two accidents, slowed things down, and dug up the communications between the craft and the command post.
All right. Thanks, Tracy. All right. So as most of you have probably heard by now, on January 29th, a Blackhawk helicopter collided with a commercial airliner that had 64 people aboard, and there was 3 people aboard the Blackhawk. We do have some footage of that we're going to show you now. On the left, you can see the Blackhawk as it collides with the airliner, and they both fall into the Potomac River. And I think I have another angle of this that we're going to show here in just a second. Yeah, there it is. And you can see the Blackhawk on the left as it approaches at a relatively level flight path, and it strikes the airliner, and then they both fall into the water. Now, we do have some of the flight radar, which I've combined with the transmissions and some videos, and these are all lined up in time, and so you can see how it plays out. So I'm going to play this video, and then I'll describe a little bit of what you see.
Traffic just off the workspace here today at 1,000 feet, start runway 3. S25, get the CRJ in flight. S25, pass on this CRJ. Aircraft inside pressure separation. This separation group. Welcome 472 Washington Tower, 1 star, 32017.
Tower, did you see that?
Yep, we saw it. And everybody just hold your positions, please, on the field right now. Fire command. The accident happened in the river. Both the helicopter and the plane crashed in the river. It's east of the approach end of runway 33. All runways are closed. Nobody's landing. No one's moving at all. It was probably out in the middle of the river. I just saw a fireball and then it was just gone. So I haven't seen anything since they hit the river, but it was a CRJ and a helicopter that hit. I would say maybe a half-mile off the approach end of 33.
All right. So what you saw there was a combination of the flight radar and videos that were all matched up in real time, along with the communications. Now, for reference, PAT 25 is the Blackhawk helicopter. PAT stands for priority. I forgot what this was. Priority.
It's just they had some very important cargo, basically.
Yeah. It was like a VIP that would be normally aboard that craft. And then CRJ was the code for the type of airplane that the commercial airliner was. And you heard the tower advised that there was traffic in the area, and then when they got closer, they called out to the helicopter and said, do you have sight on the CRJ, which was the commercial airline? And then they said, pass behind the CRJ. Shortly after that, the helicopter, PAT 25, said that they have the aircraft in sight, and they requested visual separation. Now, what visual separation means is that the pilot is allowed to use his own eyes to maintain physical distance from the other craft. Now, it's up to the tower whether or not they approve that. And you probably heard directly afterwards that the tower had approved visual separation, which allows the Blackhawk pilot to maintain separation on their own by visual reference from the airplane. However, what a lot of people have said is that the air traffic control could have and probably should have alerted the helicopter to either stop or descend or turn left, or any of those things could have prevented the crash. But the air traffic controller had kind of deferred responsibility to the helicopter by granting permission to, maintain visual separation. So that does put the responsibility onto the helicopter pilot. However, there's a lot of critics of the air traffic controller who said that he should have actually told the helicopter, gave him orders to do one of those three things rather than just let him do it on his own. So now I'm going to go to, there's been a lot of crashes this year. I just want to show there's like at least 7 of them that were this month. This is worldwide, but there were at least 7 of them that happened before the DC crash on the 29th. Now, this particular airliner actually contained, like I said, 64 people, many of which were figure skaters. They're well known. Some of these include Evgenia Siskova and Vadim Naumov, Angela Yang and Sean Kay, and members of the Skating Club of Boston. And there were a lot of people who were, really broken up over this. And even Nancy Kerrigan made an appearance talking about how affected the community was. There was a lot of, like I said, US and Russian figure skaters aboard this flight. And some of them were going to be competing in the Olympics. And so this may affect the outcome of the Olympics, but that's kind of besides the point. I do want to show a post by another pilot who has experience with that craft and the airport. What I found relevant here was that he said the Pat-25, the helicopter, was flying on visual flight rules, while the airliner was flying on instrument flight rules. And this meant that the airline had priority or right-of-way over the helicopter, and the helicopter should have been constantly looking out visually for the other aircraft. Now, moments before the crash, the tower said to the helicopter, or called to the helicopter and asked them to confirm that they had the other aircraft in sight, to which Pat-25 replied that they had the other aircraft in sight, and that's when they requested visual separation, which was granted. Now, it's the opinion of this pilot that Pat-25 actually had another aircraft, which was a departing flight, in their sight, and did not realize that the incoming plane was descending directly into their flight path. Now, this is a still photo from one of the videos that shows the helicopter where the red arrow is pointing, the landing flight in the yellow, and the departing flight in the right. Now, it's that airplane, it's that pilot's opinion that the helicopter most likely had sight of the departing flight and not the landing flight. And when they were told to pass behind the CRJ, it appeared to them that they may have been actually behind it. Now, in my opinion, that is the most, I guess you could say, plausible scenario that requires the least number of assumptions, or Occam's razor, as it were, the simplest explanation, right? But as we've seen, in the truth world, that's not always the case. Sometimes there are other circumstances that are beyond the simplest explanation. And I know there's a lot of truth seekers out there who would agree with me on that.
Yeah, well, what made me think that, I mean, not just because of the location and the fact that it was a military craft, is that it was going full speed and it looked intentional. It didn't look like an accident, like
right.
It could have slowed down, it could have swerved, changed altitude. It looked like it was, trying to hit the plane. But
well, yeah, it does almost look intentional. Especially when you consider that the helicopter was kind of in violation of other rules as well. So as far as the altitude goes, we have a flight path for the helicopter, which shows various different altitudes, all of which are above the 200 feet ceiling that's supposed to be there for the corridor. Now, the Potomac River is a helicopter corridor. They often do fly Blackhawks along the river here, but they're supposed to maintain a maximum altitude of 200 feet, especially near the airport. Now, it has come into question whether or not the helicopter was, at the right altitude. Now, they can say for sure that the airline, according to the flight data recorder, was at about 325 feet of altitude, give or take 25 feet. Now, what's really strange is that the tower was getting a reading back on the helicopter that showed it at 200 feet of altitude. And that's a really strange thing to happen. It's almost like either a radar glitch or perhaps some sort of GPS spoofing that might have happened there. I am speculating, but there's very few explanations that could account for the discrepancy in the radar returns on the tower, because if they were separated by 100, 150 feet, then they would not have collided. And the fact that they did collide shows that they were absolutely at the same altitude. All right, so let's see here. All right, so I showed the flight path. Now, one thing I want to point out here also is that they turned on their transponder at 1,000 feet of altitude. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where they took off from. That just means that's where they turned on their transponder. However, that's also another violation of the flight rules. We have here the Army pre-flight checklist, which is Form 1801, and Step 10B includes turning on the transponder, and this being a pre-flight checklist is supposed to be done prior to flight. So the fact that their transponder came on at 1,000 feet means that they violated Rule 10B of their checklist. Okay, all right, so now I want to go to a couple of videos here. One of them actually is a news report about the day before at the very same airport where the same thing almost happened.
Just this morning, we learned that a day before that deadly mid-air collision outside of D.C., a similar situation actually played out involving a flight from Connecticut, and it really was a close call.
Freakout 4514, what was the reason for the go-around?
We had an RA with the helicopter traffic below us, Freakout 4514.
So I want you to take a look at your screen right now. This is a map of what happened on a flight from Bradley to Reagan Airport, and that's where the trouble was. Here's what we know. A Republic Airways flight took off on Tuesday from Bradley, bound for D.C., but the initial landing was aborted because a helicopter got too close to the plane's flight path. Now, the pilot eventually was able to land safely, and no one was injured, but of course, we all know what happened in that same area the very next day.
Okay, so the same thing almost happened the day before, but the airline actually aborted the original landing and went around to make a second attempt, which was successful. Now, that's not the only time at that airport that Blackhawks have been seen in close proximity to aircraft. Just six days before the crash, a passenger took this video from a departing flight that shows two Blackhawk helicopters also in close proximity and at a similar altitude to the airplane. Now, this is probably allowed because they're over the river and they're flying parallel with the plane, so it doesn't look like they have an intersecting flight path. However, it does show how close those helicopters have been getting to the airplanes. And the fact that an airplane actually had to abort a landing the day before is kind of suspicious, because there was a helicopter in their way just the day before an actual helicopter collided with the plane. All right, okay, so now I have some more pictures here that I want to go to. This one actually shows the crews. It shows the crew and captain of the airliner as well as those of the helicopter. Now, I don't think that the identities of the airline pilot or even the passengers were significant in, like, say, a targeted sense. Like, I think the pilot, he did everything correctly. There was no mistakes on his part. And I don't think, I mean, it's possible that maybe some of the passengers could have been a target, but I find it a little bit less likely, you know. I just don't find that as likely of an explanation. However, they did finally release the names of the helicopter crew, and they include a staff sergeant from Georgia, a chief warrant officer, Andrew Eves from Maryland, and then the final name that they released was Captain Rebecca Lobach, who was only 28, and she was from Durham, North Carolina. Now, one thing that I think is significant about this is that they actually withheld her name for the first 2 days, and speculation was generated out of this, and a lot of people had said, you know, that it was originally some sort of transgender DEI hire who was at the wheel, who that person, Joe Ellis, actually rebutted that as a false fake news. But what turns out to have happened was that they withheld the name until the family could release the statement. But then by the time the family had released their statement and released the identity of the woman, all of her social media accounts had been scrubbed from the internet. So there was no trace of her online when it comes to social media. And I find it really unlikely that the family would do such a thing unless they were probably asked to by some sort of governmental agency, or maybe the family is just being used as an excuse to buy time for the government to scrub that data. However it worked out, her social media was scrubbed and there is no, basically digital footprint of this person left. One thing I do want to point out is that she was also an aide for the Joe Biden White House. And she's seen here in a picture in the helicopter. And some people have pointed out that her hair was actually down under the helmet, which is outside of Army regulations. You're normally supposed to have your hair tied back if it's long. But I figure that this is probably just a photo op where they were posing and not actually operating the craft. Okay. Another thing I wanted to point out too is that this captain had 5 years of service flying helicopters, but in those 5 years had only accrued 450 hours of flight. Now that's only about 90 hours a year, which is not very much actually, to be honest. They act like 500 or 450 hours is a lot, but it's actually not. Those are kind of rookie numbers. All right, another thing that I wanted to point out.
Just really quick, I just wanted to point out, because we're going to go into the continuity of government, and this was like a practice or something. You would think they'd put a more seasoned pilot in charge for, CAT 20, was they call it CAT 25 or CAT 25?
CAT 25.
CAT 25. So this was supposedly a really important flight, right? And like potentially rescuing high-ranking officials from the DC area. So it is kind of weird that he didn't have a whole lot of experience. But I don't know. Maybe that's just how it is.
But this was allegedly a training mission. It was a night vision training mission that they were doing, and they probably were practicing for such an event. And I would like to believe that in the event of such things happening, it would activate continuity of government and require the use of this craft, that they would probably use a pilot that has more experience.
You don't think because it was a practice for the pilots too? I just what I was thinking. It was a practice for that pilot to take on the real mission.
I believe that pilot was training to do such a mission. However, they were probably training, they were probably training all of their pilots to do those kinds of missions, and it was probably just her turn. And if it came down to it, that there was a real scenario, I would think they would probably use the most senior pilot available as opposed to someone with so few hours. But yeah, the fact that they were training for a continuity of government mission is likely to be relevant when all the facts come out, because I do think that's going to be related. And
just because let's just explain really quickly. I could sum up the continuity of government. It was instilled years ago, but it's a plan to, I guess, like overstep the Constitution in the case of a mass casualty event to appoint the leaders. So like if horrible thing happens in DC and we lose a lot of our elected officials, it's a process to get people back in those positions without having to go through elections and the normal processes, right?
Right. Yeah. The continuity of government plan is to ensure the continuing operation of the federal government in the case of a national disaster like a nuclear strike. And so that's why they do that. And speaking of continuity of government, another aspect of that is the Doomsday plane, which is a Boeing E-4B, which is like a modified 747, which is it's built to be like a mobile command center or a flying Pentagon, basically. And this plane was actually dispatched shortly after the crash, and it flew straight over DC and actually flew over the crash site before actually landing at Andrews Air Force Base, which is seen here at the lower right of this map. But you can also see the Potomac River and Ronald Reagan Airport at the upper left of this map. So the Doomsday plane actually flew over the crash site and before landing at Andrews Air Force Base. Now, in the event of a real continuity of government plan, the E-4B would be activated like it was on 9/11. It would be activated, and it would come and it would pick up the president and would fly him to a safer location. Now, the fact that this plane was dispatched either meant that the crash itself initiated continuity of government plan, exercise, or the doomsday plane itself could have been part of this exercise that also involved the helicopter. It's really unknown at this time. However, they've been practicing to enact a continuity of government plan for a long time, actually. And I remember that we first mentioned it when we did the UFO PSYOP video about how they're looking for alternate excuses besides a nuclear strike to utilize as an excuse to activate the continuity of government plan and emergency powers. So the fact that it didn't happen before Trump's inauguration just means that I think it means that not enough people fell for the UFO hoax to buy into that and be afraid enough to think of it as a threat to national security, when in fact it actually wasn't. We found out that it's actually not. All right, so a lot of people had wondered whether Trump was on the plane or whether the plane had come to pick Trump up. And it turns out, according to the White House schedule, Trump had been in the White House the day before and the day after, and he didn't actually fly out to Mar-a-Lago until a couple of days later. So it looks like Trump was in DC at the time, and if the E-4B was scrambled to pick him up, then that's what it was doing there. It flew out there, to pick up Trump, unless it was part of an exercise, which they usually don't scramble those for exercises. So the fact that there was a crash, I think, is what initiated that. All right, let's see here. I do have some more videos I want to play. This one is the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth's reaction to the crash in DC.
First and foremost, from the Defense Department, want to pass our condolences to the 64 souls and their families that were affected by this. Never should happen. And certainly the 3 service members, the 3 soldiers, a young captain, staff sergeant, and a CW2, chief warrant officer, on a routine annual retraining of night flights on a standard corridor for a continuity of government mission. The military does dangerous things. It does routine things on the regular basis. Tragically, last night, a mistake was made. I think the president is right. There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DOD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DOD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it so that it does not happen again, because it's absolutely unacceptable.
All right, so there you heard Pete Hegseth confirm that it was for a continuity of government mission, and he also touched on the fact that there was an altitude or elevation issue, which I had touched on before, because if they were actually at different altitudes as the radar suggested, then they would not have collided. All right, so did you have anything else about the DC crash?
Well, I just wanted to discuss a little, like, why such a horrible accident happened with a military craft in an area where they should have known there's so many dangers. And one of the things I thought is there was maybe some sort of hacking, either hijacking or hacking, but not a person. I think some kind of like electronic hacking. And we've seen I did remember a case of a fighter jet losing control of their jet. I think they're over either North or South Carolina. I can't remember any more details, but one of those pilots parachuted out and landed in someone's yard, and he gave an interview. But he said that he lost control of the jet. So we've been hearing about this, happening not just with cars, but also with aircraft.
Yeah, right. And as well, so the ship that hit the Baltimore Bridge, that was actually an act of cyber terrorism where they used GPS spoofing to trick the boat into hitting the bridge. Now, that could probably be something that was done here, whether it was GPS or radar spoofing, I'm not sure. But you did bring up a good point that the helicopter itself could have been hacked, because Lockheed and Sikorsky, they do have an automated system for the Blackhawk that they've developed with DARPA, and that does allow the Blackhawk to fly autonomously without any people inside. But it can also be taken over while there are people inside as well. So it is possible that the pilot of the helicopter did see the right aircraft and did try to make evasive maneuvers, but it may be possible. It may be possible that the helicopter was taken over at that point and they were unable to veer away. So that is a possibility.
I think that's the most likely, because for them to not
very likely
have tried to avoid it, and for 3 trained eyes to be looking, and I know one of the statements from one of the officials is that they probably like looked down to enter information and didn't see it, but
I find that to be less likely than the scenario where it was taken over. So I think what we would have to do to confirm that would be to find out if that particular helicopter had the DARPA upgrades. And if so, then that's very suspicious, because it could have been taken over at any time.
Yeah, I think, me personally, I think that's what was going on. Okay, so let's move on to the Philly crash. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this one I don't feel like has as much evidence, but let's show the footage, the slow down footage, a little bit of the aftermath. Let's skip the mayor, and then we'll show the F-35 coming down in Alaska.
Okay.
And then I don't want to go into the Houston. We just don't know enough about what happened in Houston yesterday. So.
Okay. All right. So then 2 days after the DC crash on January 31st was the crash in Philly. And there's been a lot of angles that were shown of that, but I think this is one of the better angles that I could find in higher quality. All right, so in that video, you could actually see that it looks like an airplane. You could see some of the anti-collision lights actually still blinking on the airplane, which rules out the missile theory. So I know that at first glance, from some angles, it did look like it was coming in pretty fast, and it was moving quickly, but it wasn't going missile speed. And you could also hear the engines, which did sound like an airplane. Now, I took this clip and I slowed it down in one spot and I zoomed in. So here you can see the same clip, but then here I zoom in and I slowed it down, and you can see the plane blink, and as it falls, you can almost see a little bit of flame coming off the back. Now, I can't tell if that's actual, flames, like, if it was on fire or if that was just like a smoke trail, or who knows what that was, but it's possible it could have been on fire. And we will have to wait for the details from the black box to be released to find out if there was any sort of engine malfunction or a bird strike or a drone strike, or perhaps some sort of clandestine terrorist attack.
Right. Well, I know it was only in the air for a very short period of time. I also know that it was an old craft. I think it was built in '91. So it wasn't like a brand spanking new aircraft.
So they stopped making those craft in '91, but I believe that particular plane was actually built in like '84 or in the mid '80s, somewhere in the mid '80s.
Like almost 40. It's like 40 years old.
It was like a 37-year-old airplane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's possible that something could have just failed. And I'm going to go ahead and show some of the aftermath here in Philly. You can see the impact crater there, which was over 8 feet deep. And that is where they found the black box at the bottom of that crater. They had looked for it for quite some time before they actually found it in there. And you can see that it actually grazed the top of that sign before impacting at about a 45-degree angle, but it was pointed nose down. And that's why it cratered so hard like it did and disintegrated into such small pieces. All right. So we're going to go ahead and skip the mayor, and we're going to go into the F-35 crash that happened in Alaska. We're just going to touch on this briefly. So this happened on the 28th, which was the day before the DC crash. And this supposedly happened from some sort of malfunction, an equipment malfunction. Now, you would think that a plane that costs $100 million would be, I guess, hardened against these sort of malfunctions, or they would have gotten all the glitches and the bugs out by now.
But
So
one of the pilot, I guess, came out. I saw the parachute, so he survived,
yeah,
right?
the pilot survived. There was no fatalities in that crash. However, it was $100 million crash, basically.
Did we ever get the statement from that, hear about from what the pilot that parachuted out? Did we ever hear what he
Um,
said? How
I didn't actually take the time to dig into this. That might have been released by now. I just hadn't had the time to follow up on that. But from preliminary reports, they said there was some sort of malfunction.
Yeah, I'm gonna look for that clip of the pilot that parachuted and said he lost control. It came up and then it was, buried very quickly. But it could be what's going on today.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And I guess if we're not going to touch on Houston, then that's all I have for today.
Yeah, there was a passenger plane that caught fire on the ground and people had to evacuate. But yeah, I don't know enough about that to know if that was like an intentional thing or not. And no one was hurt and no one lost their lives. But I think they have to use that that slide that comes out of the plane. So
they did.
It
yeah.
was a really terrifying experience to be on that plane. So what do you think happened with the plane in Philly? Like, most likely, why did it crash?
Well, at first, when I saw what I thought was maybe flames coming off of the back of one of the engines, I thought maybe they had like an engine flame out or an engine malfunction. Could have been a bird strike, possibly even a drone strike. But there is other video floating around there that might suggest something else. I wasn't going to go too much into that. There could be foul play at work, but if more information comes out on that, then we'll update it.
All right, you cut out there, so I'm sorry, I don't know what you said, but it's okay. I wanted to bring up just last thing. I'll close it up with that. The 6 passengers on the flight were on a medical plane going back to Mexico. The little girl was getting treatment in Philadelphia, right? And it came down really fast. And so, you have to question, were they targeted in some way? Possibly, but I don't know. I couldn't find enough information on the people on the plane. But there have been questions if they were, political or cartel family members, but we may never know that. So that one, compared to the other one, is more likely an accident. But the fact that it came down so fast, it literally took off and came down, suggests that there was some sort of outside source to how that happened.
Yeah. When it comes to the passengers of the plane in Philadelphia, I don't think that there was anything, I don't think there was anything that would cause them to be targeted. They seem like regular people. However, it doesn't mean that the plane itself wasn't targeted for nefarious reasons. I have not ruled that out. And there is some data that might suggest that. I just didn't want to put that out before, I was certain.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I don't think it was a foreign terrorist because they were all Mexican citizens, but it could have been an attempt to terrorize the population, because knowing that at any minute a plane can come and crash and hit you, in just some little suburban town in Philadelphia, does, put a real, it is terrifying, especially if you live by an airport. And a lot of people do live by an airport, and that one was right by the airport. So it also could be just a scare tactic by the deep state. I'm not sure. But yeah, really crazy month we're having here between the fires and all these plane crashes. And I don't see it stopping. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few weeks we have another event. And because there's so much, those previous events get forgotten. I mean, already the LA fires are starting to get lost, you know, in the past, and it hasn't even been a month.
Right.
And just aren't enough people that are like reporting like us, you know, reporting on the truth to keep up with all of these stories and follow up. I do have some follow-up information on the LA fires that I think is really interesting, but we'll put something together for that, either a short video or a short or something, because we need to keep an eye on that, because when you're not paying attention, you know, when the cat is away, the mice tend to play, is certainly, I think, going on here in LA. So I do want to keep up with that. So is there anything else you wanted to share today?
No, that's all for today.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for putting all that research together. And yeah, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.